I slowly open my eyes, but the world in front of me is just blurry silhouettes dissolved in a blinding white light. There is a dull, oppressive noise in my ears, as if I were immersed in water, where everything sounds muffled and alien. Voices drift above me, fragmentary, unintelligible, like the echo of a distant whisper. Body. It's not mine anymore. It is alien, helpless, motionless, as if carved from stone. I try to move in vain. I try to breathe deeper, and I encounter a painful heaviness in my chest, which constrains me and does not allow the air to pass freely. Each attempt to inhale is given with effort, as if the lungs have forgotten how to work. The pungent smell of antiseptic and medicine fills the nostrils and penetrates the lungs, causing dizziness. This smell is sterile, cold, lifeless. It brings with it a feeling of emptiness and vague anxiety. Where am I? What's wrong with me? A dull panic rises inside, but the body remains motionless. I am a prisoner of my own mind, surrounded by light, noise, and fear. Mr. Hudson. A soft but persistent female voice breaks through the dull noise filling my mind. It seems to penetrate through the thickness of the water, approaching, displacing the suffocating emptiness. Can you hear me? I try to answer, but my lips barely move, as if they are not obeying me. The throat is dry, the tongue seems heavy and motionless. Anxiety grows deep inside. Gradually, the fog before the eyes begins to dissipate. The outlines become clearer. Several figures in white coats leaned over me, their faces half hidden by masks. The eyes look carefully, studying, but I can't concentrate, as if my gaze is constantly slipping away. Doctors, nurses, I don't understand what's going on. Everything around me seems both real and blurry, as if I'm waking up from a long, heavy sleep. The eyelids are leaden, and in the head there is a viscous emptiness. It seems that I was injected with something that leaves my mind clouded, preventing me from thinking clearly. Where am I? The voice that escapes my lips sounds alien, hoarse, weak, as if it had not been used for years. Every word comes with difficulty, and even this short question causes a painful dryness in the throat. One of the doctors, a man of about 50, with gray hair at the temples and calm but wary eyes, takes a step closer. His voice is even, measured, but there is a hint of caution in it, as if he is choosing his words. "You're in the hospital," he replies, watching me carefully. "Did you have an accident? We performed the operation. You need to remain calm." Accident. This word echoes in the mind, awakening something dark, torn into fragments of memories. But they do not add up to a complete picture. I try to grab hold of them, but in my head there is only emptiness and a hum, oppressive, heavy. Memories flash in scattered images, a resounding metal blow, sharp pain, darkness. I was at a production site, checking equipment, when a loud crash was heard. Someone shouted, and suddenly I felt a sharp push in my back. Something heavy fell on me from above, perhaps part of a beam or a mechanism that had failed. I didn't even have time to react when the ground disappeared from under my feet and darkness swallowed me. But what exactly happened? The brain refuses to connect the pieces together. "Rachel," I whisper barely audibly, and at the same moment I notice her. She stands against the wall, a little further away, with her arms crossed over her chest. Her posture is straight and tense, but her face remains impenetrable. Too calm. No tears, no fear, not even a shadow of relief, only cold wariness in the depths of the eyes. She nods at me, slowly, almost mechanically, but doesn't take a step closer. Something in her gaze worries me. A slight pang of anxiety runs through my mind, but I can't understand what exactly is wrong. Rachel was always there for me whenever I got a little sick or had a minor injury. She always rushed to me, squeezed my hand, and whispered words of support. But now she's just watching, detached, as if watching something unfamiliar. "You need to gain strength, Mr. Hudson." The doctor's voice pulls me out of this alarming stupor. "The main thing now is recovery." I can hardly look away from Rachel, focusing on the doctor. There is a feeling of anxiety in my chest, but I try to suppress it. "What is wrong with me?" The voice trembles treacherously. Fear is already rising inside, that sticky, binding fear. and I suddenly realize what exactly fills me with horror. The doctor is silent for a moment. A tense silence hangs in the room. The nurse glances at him briefly, as if waiting for what he will say. A shadow of sympathy flashes across her face. Finally, the doctor takes a deep breath. "You have a spinal injury." His voice is calm, but a carefully hidden heaviness can be heard in it. The impact caused temporary nerve damage. At this point, you can't move your legs. The world around us is shrinking, turning into an echoing emptiness. Walls, light, voices, everything recedes. You can't move your legs. I don't immediately understand what he just said. I can't wrap my head around it. I try to move my toes, but nothing. I strain my muscles, but below the belt there is emptiness. An emptiness that feels alien, foreign to me, as if my lower half has simply disappeared. Panic seized me. My heart is pounding. But is this temporary? My voice trembles, breaks, stumbles on every word. Will I recover? The doctor nods, but there is no confidence in his gaze, only carefully hidden tension. The face is too serious, too concentrated, as if he is afraid to give false hope. "We hope so," he says calmly, but there is a hint of caution in his voice. "Everything will depend on rehabilitation and your mood. I want to laugh, but inside there is only an icy emptiness. What does attitude matter if my body betrays me? If my legs, my own flesh and blood, no longer belong to me? Something heavy and impenetrable is compressed in my chest. I feel this fear, this awareness, slowly creeping closer, ready to cover me headlong with hopelessness. I look over at Rachel. She still stands against the wall without moving a single step. Her arms are crossed on her chest. Her posture is closed, aloof. She looks at me, but this look, it is not the same as before. There is no pain, no anxiety, only fatigue or irritation. Her lips are pressed tightly together, as if she is trying to contain the words that are rushing out. What words? Why is she silent? Why doesn't he come to me? Doesn't hold your hand, doesn't stroke your cheek like before. I swallow the lump in my throat and force myself to speak. "I'm glad you're here." I hope to hear at least something encouraging in response, something that will save me from this icy emptiness growing inside. But her face remains all the same impenetrable. "Of course," she says, but her voice is empty. No warmth, no relief, just a statement of fact. Rest. She doesn't say, "I love you." She just stands there, still aloof, as if she's waiting for the moment to leave. It's as if her thoughts are already far from here, far from me. It was as if something had changed irreversibly between us. And I don't know what's worse, losing the ability to walk or losing something that I didn't even have time to realize. I'm starting to feel sick of this emptiness. And suddenly I understood. Not only my body was paralyzed. Everything that she and I had before has been paralyzed. I lie in bed, looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds outside the door. The nurses are talking in the corridor, carts with medicines are ringing, but my room is empty. Rachel left. The doctor left. Everyone left, and I was left alone with myself. I close my eyes, but that only makes it worse. Memories arise in the darkness. I remember the first time I saw her an autumn evening, a noisy cafe, silhouettes of people flashed somewhere in the muted light. She sat by the window with a cup of coffee in her hands and seemed detached from this whole hectic world. Her brown hair was casually tied up, the warm light of the lamps reflected in her eyes, and I could not look away. We ended up in that cafe thanks to Tom, my old friend, who then pulled me to meet someone from his company. He always believed that I needed to communicate more, meet new people. I reluctantly agreed, thinking that I would spend the evening in empty conversations, but as soon as I saw Rachel, everything changed. Tom sat me down next to her, saying briefly, "Rachel, this is Andrew. I think you'll have something to talk about," and disappeared into the depths of the cafe. The first few seconds passed in awkward silence, but then she smiled a warm, slightly shy smile that immediately made me feel comfortable. When she spoke, her voice was soft, filled with curiosity, and I knew that I had to do everything to see that smile again. We talked for several hours. It turned out that we have a lot in common, a love for books, for travel, for leisurely evenings spent in cozy places. She talked about her dream of opening an art studio, and I shared my thoughts about how I always wanted to build something of my own, something meaningful. It was the first time I felt like I had met someone who truly understood me. That evening, when I walked her home, it was drizzling lightly. We stood at the entrance, and I didn't know how to say goodbye correctly. Then she leaned over and kissed my cheek, leaving a light scent of cinnamon and coffee. This moment is forever imprinted in my memory. When I first told her that I loved her, it was under an old oak tree in the park where we often walked. Then there was so much warmth, so much tenderness in her eyes. I remember how she lightly squeezed my hand and whispered in response, "And I you." These words then sounded like a promise, like an oath. Can all this disappear? I force myself to think logically. She's just scared. It's a shock. Anyone would be scared. We've been together for so long, and despite everything, she loves me. This is temporary. It's just fatigue, fear of the unknown. Rachel couldn't just move away. She is strong, but she also needs support. We can handle it. A sharp knock on the door makes me flinch. A nurse enters the room, young, with a soft voice and a kind look. She is holding a syringe in her hands. "Good evening, Mr. Hudson. I came to give you an injection. How are you feeling?" Her voice sounds ordinary, but I'm pleased that at least someone is interested. "How can you expect?" I shrug, feeling the heaviness in my body. I don't feel much change yet. She nods, not surprised, carefully injects and adjusts the Roman 4. This is fine. The main thing is to take your time. The body needs time to recover. Rest will help you. I nod, even though sleep is the last thing I want. The nurse smiles again and leaves, leaving me in silence. Rachel walked into the empty house and immediately felt how quiet it had become. There used to always be movement here, children, David, bustle after work. Now only the muffled noise of the refrigerator and the flickering of street lights outside the windows reminded me that time was passing. She took off her coat, hung it on a hook, and walked into the kitchen. Everything was neat just as she had left it in the morning. Not a single trace of anyone else's presence. This was their common home, but now it seemed alien to her. She turned on the stove, put on the frying pan, and thought, choosing what to cook. It seemed that even this simple task suddenly became difficult. She sighed and decided to make something simple, a cheese omelet. She took the eggs from the refrigerator, but her hands were shaking slightly. "How so?" she thought, breaking one egg. "Just a week has passed, and I feel like a stranger in my own life." A week ago, she was sitting in the office, looking through documents, when the phone rang. She picked up the phone, not expecting anything unusual, but the voice on the other end of the line made her heart clench. "Mrs. Hudson? This is the secretary from your husband's business. We had an accident. David is now in the hospital." Her fingers clenched the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. My ears started ringing. For a second, she could not utter a word. "What's wrong with him?" she finally exhaled. "His condition is stable, but he received serious injuries. We recommend that you come immediately." She remembered how she automatically packed her bag, how she barely understood what her colleagues were saying to her, and then flew into a taxi, not noticing anything around her. When she entered the room and saw her husband, she was seized with panic. He looked so fragile, so helpless. She always knew him to be strong. A man who solves problems, makes decisions, leads the family forward. And now he lay bedridden, his skin looking pale and his eyes dull. At that moment, she realized for the first time that her life had changed forever. She shook out the pan while stirring the eggs and frowned. She was overcome with fear. What now? How will she cope? David was always involved in finances. He provided for the family. He resolved all important issues. Of course, they had savings, but would they be enough? For rehabilitation for a nurse? To pay all expenses? What if all this drags on for years? She couldn't imagine it. Rachel pursed her lips. She is a 40-year-old woman. She worked as a secretary at Blake Partners, earning good money, But it was not enough to carry everything on herself. She couldn't imagine spending her remaining years caring for her disabled husband. She thought about how this would change her life: daily care, constant monitoring, abandonment of previous habits and plans. She remembered how colleagues at work talked about weekends, about trips, about meeting friends. And then a thought struck her. Now her life would be reduced to hospital wards, conversations with doctors, and endless care for David. She turned off the stove, threw her fork on the table, and ran her hands over her face. Deep down, she knew that David was not to blame, but this did not change her inner feeling. Her life was falling apart at the seams, and she wasn't sure she could handle it. The morning at the hospital began with a bustle. Nurses scurried through the hallways, distributing medications, checking IVs, and recording patients' vital signs. Somewhere in the distance, an MRI machine was humming, and announcements about accepting new patients were heard over the loudspeaker. David woke up feeling as if someone had invaded his personal space. Bent over him was a nurse, a young girl in a blue uniform with a badge on her chest. "Good morning, Mr. Hudson," she said with a professional smile. "How do you feel?" David blinked, trying to focus his eyes. Everything around was floating. He tried to move, but his body responded with weakness and aching muscle pain. "It's like a train ran over," he answered hoarsely. The nurse nodded understandingly. "This is normal after such injuries. Today you will have several procedures: blood tests, a doctor's examination, and a control tomography. We need to make sure the recovery goes according to plan." She checked his Roman 4, added something to the tablet, and smiled. "If something goes wrong, press the call button." David just nodded as he watched her disappear through the door. He was left alone again. About half an hour passed before Tom entered the room. An old friend, a colleague with whom he had worked together at the plant for the last 10 years. Tall, strong, with light graying in his dark hair, he was holding a paper cup of coffee in his hands. "Well, you're in trouble, buddy," Tom muttered, sitting down on a chair by the bed. "When they told me that you were in the hospital, I didn't believe it at first. I thought you just found a brilliant way to go on vacation, but it seems you went overboard with the surroundings. Do you know how this happened?" David frowned. His memories were blurry. I remember almost nothing." Tom sighed, took a sip of his coffee, and leaned closer. "I was on a different shift then. The boss told me everything. You were near the freight elevator when the beam's fastening broke. The whole damn structure collapsed. If you had stood a couple of steps to the left, you would have simply been crushed." David listened, trying to piece together the fragments of memory. A flash of pain, a crash of metal, someone screaming. Then darkness. "Damn," was all he breathed out. "Yes, no luck," Tom nodded. "Doctors say you have a chance for a full recovery, but it will take months. You must be prepared for a long rehabilitation." Tom stayed a little longer, talking about what was going on at work, what rumors were circulating among his colleagues. Then he left, leaving David alone with his thoughts again. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to be lost in memories. Just recently, his life was different. He was strong, confident, and the main breadwinner in the family. He and Rachel had a house, 2 children who left to study at universities. Everything seemed stable and correct. He resolved issues, provided for his family, and took responsibility for everything. He remembered how every morning he woke up before dawn, drank strong coffee, got ready for work, and Rachel dozed, covered with a warm blanket. On weekends, he took his son fishing and took his daughter to the center, where she chose books in her favorite bookstore. These moments seemed insignificant, but they were what made up his life. Now everything has changed. In the past, he was strong, confident, and unbending, a man who always took responsibility, worked without rest, and took care of his family without knowing fatigue. But now he lay on a cold, hard hospital bed, surrounded by faded walls, saturated with the smell of antiseptic and medicine. The quiet, measured squeak of medical equipment reminded him of his helplessness. For the first time in years, he could neither work, nor make decisions, nor protect those he loved. Everything that had previously seemed solid now shook like a house of cards before a gust of wind. How long will this last? Will he have a chance to get back on his feet, to return to the life he built with such difficulty? Thoughts about Rachel bothered him the most. How is she coping? Is she as worried as he is, or has she already come to terms with the changes? This morning she called and said that she could not come. There was an urgent meeting at work. Rachel worked as a secretary in a law firm, constantly being in the center of office intrigue and endless paperwork. She was organized, methodical, but David knew that her work always required her full involvement. Rachel's office was typical of a law firm. Spacious rooms with high ceilings, strict glass partitions separating work areas, neat rows of offices with massive oak doors. There was a familiar aroma in the air, strong black coffee mixed with the smell of fresh paper and a slight hint of her colleague's expensive perfume. Muffled voices could be heard along the corridors. Employees were animatedly discussing court cases, upcoming meetings, and the latest amendments to the law. Rachel sat at her neatly organized dark wood desk, with folders, documents, and letters laid out in neat stacks. The glossy surface reflected the soft light of the table lamp, creating the illusion of comfort amid the formality reigning around. Her fingers lazily turned over the pages, but her thoughts stubbornly refused to form a coherent whole. It seemed that everything around was living according to its own schedule. Colleagues were hurrying along the corridor with laptops and folders. Secretaries were talking on the phone. Someone was rhythmically tapping a pen on the table in the next office. But she found it difficult to concentrate. The pile of papers in front of her demanded attention, but every now and then her gaze absent-mindedly slid out the window, where the glass reflected the stern silhouette of a woman trying to put her scattering thoughts in order. "Are you okay?" Mel, her friend and colleague, quietly asked, approaching the table with a cup of coffee in her hands. "Yes, of course," Rachel answered, but there was no confidence in her voice. Mal stared at her, then sat down on the edge of the table and leaned closer. "Are you going to David today?" Rachel pressed her lips together, feeling a wave of anxiety rise within her. The thought that she would have to see David again in such a helpless state echoed dully in her chest. Her fingers clenched nervously into a fist, and her heart began to beat faster. She didn't know how to deal with this. The air in the room seemed to become heavier, as if saturated with her own doubts. This feeling depressed her, filled her with irritation, and at the same time exhausted her to the limit. She wanted to brush it off, to run away, to forget at least for a moment about the impending worries, but reality was inexorable. He was discharged tomorrow. Tomorrow, her usual life will completely change, requiring complete dedication from her. Caring for David meant not only the endless juggling of work and caring for him, but also constant trips to rehab, sleepless nights, stressful days, trying to keep everything under control. She could already feel this burden weighing on her shoulders before it even began. Rachel ran a hand over her face, looking out the window. Behind the glass, the evening city shone with lights, but she did not see its beauty. Her thoughts were too busy with the upcoming trials. This evening was her last chance to catch her breath, to allow herself at least a few hours of peace before once again taking on a load that she didn't know if she could bear. "It won't work today," she answered after a pause. "I need to rest a little because it will be difficult further." Mal nodded in understanding. Then suddenly an idea struck her. "How about we go somewhere in the evening? Let's sit at the bar, drink wine, and unwind." Rachel thought about it. It sounded tempting. She really needed something to take her mind off all this chaos for a little while. "It's not such a bad idea," she finally said, a slight note of relief in her voice. "Let's do that." She took a deep breath, pulled out her phone, and dialed her husband's number. When David answered, she quickly made an excuse. "Hello, dear. I won't be able to come today. We have an urgent meeting here. We have a lot of work to do." "I understand," David answered briefly, and she sensed a note of disappointment in his voice. "How are you?" she asked, trying to sound caring. "Everything is fine. Procedures, tests, as usual." "Okay," she hesitated, not knowing what else to say. "Then we'll talk. See you tomorrow?" "Certainly." She put the phone down and felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Instead of going to the hospital, she decided to spend the evening with her friends. It didn't hurt for them to unwind a little. She imagined them sitting in a cozy bar, drinking cocktails, laughing, discussing the latest news. This was what she needed now. A little freedom, a little lightness. David opened his eyes, feeling a familiar heaviness in his body. It's been a week since he woke up in the hospital. Every day was similar to the previous one. Examination by doctors, tests, physical therapy. His indicators were normal. The doctors assured that everything was going according to plan. But one thing remained unchanged: he did not feel anything below the belt. He really wanted to believe that this was temporary, that soon he would feel his legs again, be able to walk again, be his old self again. The doctors said that everything was possible, but they did not give a time frame. Each case is individual. The main thing is a positive attitude. Rehabilitation takes time, words that he heard over and over again, but they did not give him answers. Sometimes he caught the glances of doctors and nurses, in which one could read sympathy and sometimes fatigue. They've probably seen too many like me, he thought. Rachel will take him home tomorrow. The thought of this was both pleasing and disturbing. He was tired of the hospital walls, the smell of antiseptic, and the constant feeling of helplessness. It will be better at home. Rachel will be there. He knew that this was also a test for her. Now all worries about the house, about himself, about trips to the rehabilitation center fall on her shoulders. He felt like a burden, but tried not to think about it. And when the children come for the weekend, everything will go back to the way it was before. He hoped that they would behave the same as before, not allowing pity to destroy their usual relationship. He imagined how they would gather in the living room, laugh, and discuss the latest news. Maybe his son Alex will even convince him to play chess like they used to do. Daughter Sophie, always energetic and enthusiastic, will definitely talk about her studies, friends, and plans for the future. These thoughts warmed him. He closed his eyes, trying to rest, but his mind still continued to work. Tomorrow, everything will change. Tomorrow, he will leave the hospital and face a new reality. He wanted to believe that he could handle it, that they will all cope. Everything should be fine. Returning from work, Rachel went straight to the bedroom. She took off her office suit and threw it on a chair, feeling a pleasant anticipation of the upcoming evening. Today, she wanted to feel free. She went to the mirror and looked appraisingly at her reflection. From the closet, she took out a tight black dress with a low neckline and an open back. The material caressed the skin, emphasizing her figure. High heels, a thin gold necklace, and a pair of neat earrings completed the look. A little makeup, scarlet lips, expressive eyes, light blush. She smiled to herself. Today, she was not just a wife and a caring woman, but an independent, self-confident beauty. When she entered the bar, her friends were already waiting for her at the counter. The atmosphere of the establishment was lively, the hum of voices, laughter, light twilight, and dim lights. The bartender dashingly juggled bottles, creating a spectacular spectacle. "You look amazing," Mal exclaimed, winking at Rachel and handing her the glass. They laughed, discussed the latest news, and enjoyed strong drinks. Gradually, the evening became more and more relaxed. Two men approached them, both confident, well-groomed, with light half-smiles, promising interesting communication. "May I treat you to another drink?" One of them, a tall brunette in a light shirt, leaned closer to Rachel. She looked at him with slight coquetry, barely noticeable, playing with a strand of hair. "Why not?" Her voice sounded soft, but there was a hidden note of excitement in it. The evening promised to be long, and Rachel allowed herself to enjoy the moment, forgetting for a moment about everything that awaited her tomorrow. The men introduced themselves. A tall brunette in a light shirt turned out to be a lawyer named Daniel, and his companion, a strongly built blonde man with light stubble, identified himself as Mark, the owner of a small restaurant business. Their manner of communication was easy and confident, and their jokes had a touch of adult humor. "I hope your establishment serves not only dishes, but also good impressions." Rachel teased him, twirling her cocktail glass. "Only the best," Mark answered with a grin. "But you have to pay for additional tasting in a special currency good company." "Then today is definitely a good evening for you," Mal added with a wink. They continued their conversation, exchanging witticisms and playful remarks. Daniel, who had been watching Rachel closely, leaned a little closer. "You look like you were made to turn heads and break hearts," he said with a warm smile, his voice filled with admiration. Throughout the evening, he continued to shower her with compliments, saying everything that any woman would dream of hearing. He admired her elegance, her grace, her infectious laugh, reminding her how desirable, special, and inimitable she was. When the evening came to an end, the girls went home, laughing and exchanging impressions of their time. Rachel didn't know why, but before she left Daniel her number. Perhaps it was just a game, light coquetry, or maybe part of it was to feel alive and desired again. Rachel stood in the hospital lobby, holding a folder with instructions and a list of medications. The nurse patiently explained how to care for David, what exercises he needed, when he should attend the rehabilitation center, and what possible complications were possible. Rachel nodded, mechanically remembering the details, but her thoughts were far away. When David got into the car, he felt a strange sense of relief. He was tired of the hospital walls, of strangers around him. The house seemed like salvation. He looked at Rachel. Her face was tense. "Everything will be fine," he said, hoping to convince not only her, but also himself. She nodded but didn't answer. The road home passed in silence. They did not discuss the future, did not share thoughts. When they finally pulled into the yard, Rachel froze for a moment, realizing that their cozy home was not suitable for a person with disabilities. Thresholds, narrow doorways, stairs, lack of handrails in the bathroom, little things that previously seemed unnoticeable have now become a real obstacle. "We'll have to change a lot," she muttered. "We'll figure it out," David replied. The first evening at home became a test. Even getting to the bed was a problem. Everything was uncomfortable. The chairs were too low, the cabinets were too high, simple movements required effort. He felt like a stranger in his own home. Rachel understood this too, but tried to hold on. Everything seemed different from how he remembered it. The space, once cozy and warm, now seemed hostile. He could no longer simply walk up the stairs to his bedroom, or make his own coffee, or simply go out into the garden. These little things had previously seemed unnoticeable, but now they became new barriers with which he had to fight. After several unsuccessful attempts, Rachel suggested that he arrange a room on the first floor, the one that had previously been used for guests. This seemed to be the only reasonable solution, because every time trying to climb the stairs was not only difficult, but also dangerous. David agreed, although the feeling that he was now like a guest in his own home did not leave him. However, it was better than constantly fighting with a space that no longer obeyed him. The children, Alex and Sophie, came for the weekend. David was looking forward to this meeting, hoping that their arrival would bring joy and support. He wanted to feel the warmth of the family, hear familiar conversations, and forget at least for a while about his new situation. But instead of spending time with him, the children quickly went about their business. "Dad, I need money for textbooks," Alex said without even bothering to sit down. "And I want to go to Amanda's birthday," Sophie added, waiting for the transfer to the card. David looked at them, feeling empty. They didn't ask how he was feeling. They only needed one thing: money. He became for them not a father, but a wallet. "How are you doing, Dad?" Alex asked after a few minutes, but his gaze was already glued to the phone. "It's okay," David answered dryly, not finding the strength to say more. When the door closed behind them, he closed his eyes tiredly. "They didn't even stay long," he said quietly. Rachel didn't answer. She just cleared the empty cups from the table. Her face remained impassive, but tension hung in the air. He wondered when things became like this, when the children for whom he worked, for whom he got up in the morning and took on endless worries, stopped seeing him as a father and began to perceive him only as a wallet, a source of money that should provide for their desires. When the warmth with which they once ran towards him, shining with sincere joy, disappeared in their eyes. His wife, whom he considered the support with which they made vows through thick and thin, looked tired and distant. Not only did he lose the ability to walk, he lost his role in the family. Lying in bed, Rachel tried to fall asleep, but her thoughts would not let her rest. She rolled over, staring into the darkness, when suddenly the phone on the nightstand vibrated softly. The screen lit up the room and a message appeared on it. "How is the most beautiful woman in the world doing?" She blinked, at first not understanding who it was, and then she remembered. Daniel. She had completely forgotten about him since she returned home. Their light flirtation in the bar seemed something distant, almost unreal, but now it made itself felt again. She typed the answer. "Tired, but alive. Are you always sending out compliments this late?" The answer was not long in coming. "Only to those who deserve it. How are you? How did it go?" Rachel thought for a moment and then decided there was no point in pretending. She started typing. "It's difficult. David is home now, but everything is different. The house feels like a stranger. Everything is uncomfortable, everything is complicated. I don't know how to cope with it." "You're strong. You can handle this." She grinned. How easy it is to say this from the outside. "How are you? Charming new clients?" She decided to change the subject. "Only if they are as beautiful and smart as you. But I haven't met anyone worthy yet." She rolled her eyes but smiled. The conversation with him was easy, unobtrusive, and it contained what she was missing right now. "You seem to be really good at giving compliments. Is it a talent or part of the profession?" she joked. "More like a hobby, especially if I have a woman like you in front of me." Rachel hovered her fingers over the screen. She didn't know what to answer. Daniel didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't judge, but for some reason his words touched her. She understood that their conversation was gradually going beyond the scope. Is she a bad wife if she wants to feel happy? Doesn't she have the right to a moment of weakness? They continued their correspondence, laughing at random stories and discussing life. He told her about his funny clients, about how one man tried to sue his own cat for damaging furniture, and she shared how David had difficulty settling into the house, and how she had to be torn between work and caring for him. This conversation was light, but it subtly touched a chord within her. Daniel not only gave her attention, but also made her think about whether she was ready to spend her years as a caregiver. That night was spent texting, and for the first time in a while, Rachel fell asleep with a smile on her lips. David sat in a chair, looking out the window. The morning light filled the room, but he did not feel any joy in it. A few weeks ago, he dreamed of returning home, and now he realized that his presence here was a burden for Rachel. She didn't say it directly, but her phrases, her facial expression, even her tone of voice hinted at it. She didn't believe he could recover. She believed that he would remain incapacitated forever. The realization of this hit my pride. His own hands dropped. He saw no point in rehabilitation, exercise, or trying to change anything. But refusing treatment meant losing insurance benefits, and without them, he would completely lose control of his life. The rehabilitation center was located on the outskirts of the city. A modern building, large glass windows, spacious halls. People in the uniform of medical instructors smiled too tightly, the walls seemed faceless, and everything around looked alien and oppressive. He felt not like a patient, but like part of a mechanism that needed to be fixed. But everything changed when he met her. She was small, like a candle flame, but just as alive, bright and tireless. Rihanna, that's how she introduced herself, with a wide smile and a look full of energy. Her red hair shone in the sunlight, and her voice carried unshakable confidence. She didn't look like a typical physical therapist. Her movements were light, but there was strength in every gesture. "So, Mr. Hudson," she began, crossing her arms over her chest, "if you think you're just going to sit around and feel sorry for yourself, then I'm going to have to disappoint you." David chuckled, but without much enthusiasm. "Don't worry, I won't cause you any trouble. You tell me what needs to be done, and I will pretend that I am trying." Rihanna narrowed her eyes. "Oh no, that won't do. If you pretend you're trying, I'll pretend you don't exist." Agreed? He was confused. This approach surprised him. Usually the people around him spoke softly, sympathetically, but there was no pity in her voice, just determination. "Okay, let's see what you can do," he muttered. She grinned and clapped her hands. Great. Get ready, Mr. Hudson. Today we will work for real. The first training session was a nightmare. David felt weak and helpless. He could not perform even the simplest exercises properly. But Rihanna didn't let him relax. She did not feel sorry for him, did not lisp him, but demanded him. Come on, one more time, she said firmly when he tried to lift himself on the uneven bars for the third time. You can, just don't give up. Easy for you to say, he breathed, feeling sweat running down his temples. You are not in my position. You're right, she suddenly agreed. But you know what? I've seen dozens of people like you, those who want to get on their feet, and those who give up. Well, you understand. David fell silent. There was truth in her words. For the first time in a long time, someone spoke to him not as a patient, but as a man with a choice. They studied for several hours. He was exhausted, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had done something worthwhile. When the workout ended, Rihanna sat down next to him, smiling. Good job, Mr. Hudson. We'll continue tomorrow. Aren't you too strict with your patients? He asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. She laughed. Aren't you giving up too quickly? He grinned back. Something about her made him feel alive, and for the first time in a long time, he thought that maybe he still had a chance. After training, they sat in a small relaxation area and drank coffee. Rihanna told some funny stories about her patients, and David laughed sincerely. He felt lighter next to her. It seemed that next to this small but unbending girl, his problems would temporarily recede. But their calm conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Rachel. She stayed longer than usual, and when she entered, her irritation was noticeable by how abruptly she slammed the door. Ready? She asked dryly, without even looking at Rihanna. David felt uneasy. He saw Rihanna raise her eyebrows slightly, but didn't say anything. Yes, he answered, trying to hide his embarrassment. Rachel didn't even bother to say hello to Rihanna, like any well-mannered person would do. She only cast a cursory, indifferent glance at her and immediately turned away, as if she was not in the room at all. Rachel didn't speak much on the way back. She looked irritated, her fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. David felt guilty, although he couldn't understand why. Later, when he was already at home, he took the phone and wrote to Rihanna. I apologize for my wife's behavior. She's not always like this. The answer came almost immediately. Don't worry, but it seems to me that you clearly have bad taste in women. David laughed. David clenched his teeth, overcoming the pain, but did not allow himself to give up. Every day he made every effort, clinging to every opportunity to recover. Rihanna did not let him relax. Her confidence in his abilities was unshakable. Unlike others, she did not pity him, did not console him, but demanded him. Her straightforwardness irritated him, but she was the one who did not allow him to give up. Do you think this is your limit? She said one day, crossing her arms over her chest. I've seen people in much worse condition, but they didn't look for excuses. They fought. Are you going to surpass them, or will you remain one of those who gave up? Her words hurt, but that was exactly what he needed. He couldn't afford to lose. He continued, despite the pain, despite the fatigue. After all, if he gives up now, he will lose not only himself, but also his life. But another battle awaited him at home. Rachel became increasingly distant. She was not interested in his progress, did not ask questions, did not discuss the future. Their conversations became strained and empty. Sometimes she simply nodded, pretending to listen, but David could see that her thoughts were far away. She came late, avoided communication, and sometimes even became irritated by his presence. 6 months have passed since then. 6 months of daily training, overcoming myself, pain, and doubts. David, Rihanna said in the morning when they found themselves in a spacious hall with handrails. Today is a special day. Let's try to stand up without outside help. There was no pathos or feigned solemnity in her words. For Rihanna, all achievements were just steps that needed to be taken methodically and precisely. But for David, it was truly a special day. He nodded, gripping the rail until his fingers turned white. My heart was pounding loudly, and something like fear, mixed with hope, rose in my chest. He remembered how 6 months ago doctors said that the nerve endings were severely damaged, and there was no guarantee of complete recovery, but he didn't give up trying, day after day, week after week. Calm down, Rihanna prompted quietly. Concentrate. Breathing is even. She stood to the side, not touching him, but staying close, ready to back him up. Usually, she would lightly support him by the forearm or waist, but today she wanted him to try it himself. David took a deep breath, feeling the muscles in his back and arms tense. My toes tingled slightly, as if tiny electrical currents were running through me. He slowly shifted his weight to his feet. His body seemed to protest, his knees buckled, but he did not give up. The moment seemed like an eternity. And then he straightened his back and straightened up. Uncertainly, unsteadily, but still standing. Without anyone's help. Just a few seconds, but for him it was a real feat. Great, Rihanna's voice filled with emotions. Pride, joy, relief. Let's go a little further. He tried to tear his hand away from the handrail. The right leg was trembling, the left seemed to be filled with lead, but he was able to keep his balance. A second, another second. Then his knees gave way, and he sank onto the bench, unable to cope with the weight of his own body. Sorry, he exhaled, lowering his head in disappointment. Are you kidding me? Rihanna grinned, leaning towards him. You have now done something that 6 months ago doctors considered almost fantastic. Don't you dare ask for forgiveness. She handed him a bottle of water, and David took a greedy sip. Blood was pulsating in his temples, his heart was pounding, but a feeling of triumph was already beginning to reverberate in his chest. Even if it was just a tiny step, it meant that there was a road to full recovery. We need to tell Rachel about this, he said out loud, not noticing how his face changed at the same time. The mention of his wife always seemed to give him mixed feelings. A year ago, when he had an accident at work, she seemed inconsolable at first, but very quickly her attitude became aloof. Now there was still obligatory care on her part, but there was no warmth in her, and David could not understand the reason for such coldness. Rihanna sighed quietly. She never spoke ill of Rachel, but there was sometimes a sympathetic shadow in her gaze when David mentioned family problems. Are you sure she will be happy? She asked carefully. Probably, he said, not knowing who he was trying to convince more, Rihanna or himself. Deep down, he wanted Rachel to be proud of him. I wanted her to look at him with the same look that she had once greeted him in the evenings after work, to make him feel needed, loved, valuable again. David felt tense all the way. He tried to talk about what I got back on my feet today, but she just nodded, muttering, "Okay, well done." No delight, no joy. How is your work? He asked, trying to start a conversation. Yes, okay, she answered curtly. There's a lot to do now. One of our clients has an important deal coming soon. And then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and immediately hung up the call. David noticed how her lips pursed into a thin line. Never before had he seen such a reaction from her when someone at work called. Usually she answered calmly, without unnecessary emotions, and now he felt that she was nervous. Who called? He asked quietly. Yes, she winced, switching gears. For work? Doesn't matter. They drove home in silence. The atmosphere inside the car was almost palpable ice. When Rachel finally turned off the engine in the yard, she looked as if she wanted to immediately escape from this situation. I think I'll still go to the store, she said, helping him move into a chair. We need to buy some groceries. He wanted to say that the groceries bought in the morning would be enough, but he saw how intensely her eye twitched and remained silent. Okay, David agreed. David lay in bed, listening to the sounds coming from the bedroom door. The evening had already enveloped the house in soft darkness, and the silence, interrupted only by the occasional sounds of the street, made his hearing especially sensitive. He heard Rachel walking around the kitchen, saying something quietly, and then her voice became a little louder and more emotional. Curiosity and anxiety took over, and David tensed and listened. Rachel's voice was quiet but confident, and her interlocutor, her friend Mel, whose laugh he immediately recognized, answered her with a barely noticeable mockery. "You have no idea," Rachel's voice sounded with a note of delight and nervous excitement. "This is something incredible. Daniel, he knows what I want, what I've been missing all this time." David felt his heart skip a beat. He held his breath, afraid to miss a word. "Well, I understand you," Mal answered with a slight smile in her voice. "Still, this is completely different, right?" "Yes." Rachel laughed, but there was something bitter in that laugh. "He's attentive, sensual. He knows how to touch, how to look. Hell, even how to say something to make me feel wanted. I forgot what it is. With him, I'm alive." "And you don't regret it?" Mal asked, lowering her voice. "No," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling with sweet excitement. "I don't regret a second. He makes me moan like no one has ever moaned before. His touches drive me crazy, make me forget about everything. He takes me the way I need, in a way that my disabled husband will never be able to and never could." David closed his eyes, and cold, burning pain rolled through him like a sharpened blade, leaving behind deep, invisible, but unbearably painful wounds. His breathing became heavy, uneven, as if the air had suddenly turned into a viscous substance that made it difficult to breathe. Every word Rachel said pierced him, tearing apart what he had tried so desperately to hold on to inside. The hope he had clung to was crumbling, crumbling into dust, leaving behind only a gaping void. She no longer saw him as a man. He was not her desire, her passion, her choice. No, he was just an obstacle, an unnecessary burden, a shadow of the past that she dreamed of getting rid of. Everything that seemed shaky now collapsed completely, leaving him in this silence filled with betrayal. He was not a lover for her, not a support, but simply a stop on the way to something more, something that he would never be able to give her. David lay looking at the ceiling and slowly came to a decision. Tomorrow he had another rehabilitation session scheduled, but now it seemed pointless. He saw no point in continuing, no goal worth fighting for. If Rachel doesn't care about his progress, if he's just a burden to her, then why try? He remembered all their conversations, moments when she didn't even try to hide her indifference. When he talked about his successes in rehabilitation, she just nodded, without going into details. When he needed support, she threw herself into her work or found excuses to be away. These memories undermined his resolve, making it increasingly clear. In the morning, he slowly opened his eyes, and instead of preparing to go out, he simply stayed in bed. He looked at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. Rachel was walking around the house, getting ready for work, and stopped at the bedroom door. "Aren't you going to practice?" she asked, glancing at him briefly. "I don't feel well," David answered dully, avoiding her gaze. She just nodded, without asking any further questions. It seemed that she was even better this way, less fuss, less need to take care of him. Relief flashed in her eyes, and he noticed it. "I left," she said briefly, quickly glancing in his direction, but without waiting for an answer, she walked out the door. She felt relieved while driving. Now she will have more time. You can calmly finish all your work in the office and then stop by a lingerie boutique. Her lips twitched into a slight smile. Yes, she knew exactly what she wanted to buy for an evening with Daniel, something special that would drive him crazy. She imagined how he would take off her new purchase, with what impatience he would look at it. These thoughts made her heart beat faster. Everything that was at home now seemed to her something distant, blurry, insignificant. Daniel was her real reality, and this evening belonged only to them. Meanwhile, the only person who cared was Rihanna. She tried to call David, but he didn't answer. Unable to bear the anxiety, she decided to go to his house. Once on the threshold, she immediately realized that something was wrong. David opened the door with a dull look. He looked broken. His shoulders were slumped and his face looked drawn. Rihanna didn't ask questions, she just walked in, sat down on the chair opposite him and said, "Speak, what's happened?" David was silent at first, but under her gaze, he finally admitted that he had overheard Rachel's conversation. He told everything, every detail, every word, which made him feel like nobody in her eyes. How she talked about Daniel, how she looked forward to meeting him, how she dreamed of a new life in which David was no longer needed. He spoke, and with each word his voice became quieter until he was completely silent. Rihanna listened to him calmly and then covered his hand with hers. "It doesn't matter, David," she said softly. "This is your life. You shouldn't let anyone ruin it." She looked at him with sincere concern. There was no pity or condemnation in her eyes, only support. "You are stronger than you think," she added. "You can start over, without her." They talked for a long time. David finally allowed himself to express everything that was gnawing at him from the inside. He was scared, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that there was a person next to him who cared. After this conversation, he suddenly realized he was not going to endure any more. He is not going to cling to the illusion. He made a decision: he will divorce Rachel. In the evening, he picked up his phone and looked at photos of them together. Once he believed that they were happy. Now before him were only images of people who had become strangers to each other. With a heavy sigh, he dialed the lawyer's number. But he decided firmly on one thing: he would not tell Rachel about his successes yet. That he can already get back on his feet, albeit with difficulty. Let her continue to think that he is weak, that he cannot live without her. This will give him time to prepare, gain complete independence, before finally breaking ties with her. Rachel sat in the cafe, nervously tapping her fingernail on the rim of her coffee cup. She waited for Daniel, and anxiety burned inside her. Usually, he was always the first to arrive, but today he was delayed. When the door finally opened and he walked in, she immediately knew something was wrong. His gaze was intense, his movements constrained. He sat down opposite, took a short pause, and, without raising his eyes, said, "We need to take a break, Rachel." These words stuck in her mind, punching a hole in the sweet anticipation of their next meeting. She automatically took a sip of coffee, feeling her fingers grow cold. Her thoughts raced feverishly, trying to find an explanation, hope, a clue. Why? Her voice trembled, but she quickly pulled herself together, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. Lisa began to suspect something. She started asking questions, looking at me differently. "I can't take risks." His voice was low but firm. "Until everything calms down, we should be careful." Rachel nodded, hiding her emotions behind a mask of calm. But everything was boiling inside. "Break, caution," he talks as if this is just a temporary measure. But what if this is a step towards the end of their relationship? "Okay," she replied, trying to sound indifferent. "If it's necessary, then it's necessary." She took another sip of coffee, but the taste seemed bitter. Questions were swirling in my head. What if Lisa already knows everything? What if he's just afraid of her reaction? Maybe she has already started acting, threatening him, manipulating him. But the thing that worried Rachel the most was, what if Daniel was just looking for an excuse to leave? This thought made her heart clench. She remembered all their moments: stolen glances, touches, passion. She couldn't believe that none of this meant anything to him. She hoped it was temporary, that everything will change soon. Maybe if David finds out about her feelings, he will propose a divorce himself. Maybe Daniel will decide to leave Lisa. Then they will finally be together for real. This thought became her saving grace. "How long?" she asked quietly, avoiding his gaze. "I don't know." He ran his hand over his face, clearly experiencing tension. "I hope not for long. I just need Lisa to calm down." Rachel nodded, but a feeling of foreboding grew in her chest. "I hope" is too vague, too vague. She didn't want to be the one who was simply left for later. Her heart beat faster as she watched Daniel get up from the table. She wanted to say something, but didn't know what. "I love you. I don't want this break." But the words stuck in my throat. "I hope you understand," he said goodbye, but his voice did not contain the confidence that always sounded in him. She nodded, and when he left, she slowly finished her coffee, feeling warm hope in her chest. After all, now she had time to change everything. One evening, David met her in the kitchen, holding a folder in his hands. Many emotions were boiling inside, but his voice remained calm. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Rachel looked at him and then looked at the folder. Her heart beat faster. She could not hide her joy because finally everything was happening the way she wanted. Without hesitation, she took the documents without even reading them properly and signed them. Her hand did not tremble. A slight smile touched her lips. Everything was simple, easily. All? She asked, trying to keep her tone neutral, but a light of relief sparkled in her eyes. That's it, he answered dryly, taking the papers back. David looked at her and couldn't believe his eyes. He was disgusted. How? How could she undo 25 years of their marriage so easily, without a hint of doubt, without a shadow of regret? He didn't want to understand her betrayal. He didn't need explanations who, when, why. None of this mattered anymore. All that mattered was that she had betrayed him, and she did it at the moment when he needed her most, when he was more vulnerable than ever. He expected at least a second of confusion, a spark of pain in her eyes, but he saw nothing. Just a slight hint of impatience, as if she wanted it to end quickly. David clenched his teeth, feeling an icy emptiness solidify inside. "You won't even ask how I am?" he squeezed out, looking her straight in the face. Rachel froze for a moment, but then shrugged. "Why? It's already decided, David. You wanted it yourself." Did he want to? No, he didn't want to. He was forced. He could no longer live next to a man who had so easily rejected him. He nodded silently, took the documents and left. There was emptiness inside. He no longer felt anger, pain, or despair. Only an icy realization. He was left alone. But perhaps it will be even better. David didn't sleep all night. The documents lay on the bedside table, like a silent symbol of the end of his past life. He turned over every word, every moment, every glance of Rachel in his head. He remembered how he had once loved her, how they built this house, how they raised their children, how they laughed at stupid things, and now it all meant nothing. The next morning, he waited for Rihanna to come pick him up. She insisted on helping him and offered to stay with her until he got back on his feet. David hesitated for a long time, but deep down he understood that now he needed support. He couldn't believe that after everything that had happened, there was still a person in his life who cared. Rachel was excited about her new life. She was already imagining how she would tell Daniel about the divorce, how happy he would be, and how he would finally decide to leave his wife. She dreamed of how they would start all over again, no secrets, no hidden meetings, just the two of them. Now nothing could interfere with their happiness. She was nervous before the meeting, but it was a pleasant excitement. She carefully selected her outfit, wanting to look perfect, knowing that this day would be the beginning of their life together. She arrived at the restaurant early, ordered a glass of wine, and waited. Time dragged on painfully long. She checked her phone, looked out the window, and straightened her hair. I replayed in my head again and again how he would say that he loved her, that now they would be together. But when Daniel appeared a few minutes later, her heart skipped a beat. His face was strangely serious. Instead of the usual smile and hot gaze, he sat down opposite and paused. "We need to talk," he finally said, looking her straight in the eyes. Her heart beat faster. She expected completely different words. "Of course," she smiled, bowing her head. "I also wanted to tell you something. You have to understand. It was temporary. Between us, I can't leave my family." The world around me seemed to collapse. The wine in the glass no longer seemed sweet. The air suddenly became suffocating. She blinked, not believing what she heard. "What?" she whispered, barely breathing. "I have children, a business. My wife. I'm not going to ruin everything. This was a mistake. And frankly, you're too expensive, Rachel. If I divorce my wife, I will lose everything I have built over the years. I can't afford it." His voice was even, without a hint of regret. He spoke as if it were a business transaction that did not bring the expected benefits. Everything inside tightened. She wanted to scream, run out, break this damn glass, but she just looked at him helplessly. "You're joking, right?" Her voice trembled. "No." He got up, threw a few bills on the table, and left without even turning around. She couldn't believe what was happening. Their meetings, her hopes, all the sacrifices she made flashed through her head. She left David, threw away her life for a man who never looked back. She was left sitting alone. Everything she had dreamed of, everything she had destroyed for him, now had no meaning. Defeat hit me in the face like a slap in the face. She remembered how she imagined that she would be happy with him, how she dreamed about the days spent together, about a new life. But now there was emptiness before her. She lost both her husband and her lover. She destroyed everything. Rachel finished the wine in one gulp, feeling it burn her throat. Her eyes burned from tears, but she did not allow herself to cry. She slowly stood up and left the restaurant, with an icy realization spreading inside her. She was left with nothing. While Rachel spent her days crying, David and Rihanna lived a completely different life. Every day brought a new victory. Every day he stood more and more confidently on his feet, his strength increased, and his body began to obey. He learned to trust his body again, and much of this was due to Rihanna. She supported him in everything, inspired him to believe in himself, and forced him not to give up. Her confidence in him was unshakable, and this faith was transmitted to David. She did not allow him to feel sorry for himself, did not allow him to give up. Instead of sympathy, motivation, instead of pity, persistence. Every day she found new ways to cheer him up, be it morning runs, albeit on crutches, or small trips around the city together. She did everything to make him feel complete again. The time spent in her apartment was filled with laughter and lightness. Rihanna was like a fresh breeze, bringing a sense of freedom into his life. She did not allow him to dwell on the past. She helped him move forward. They laughed at his awkward attempts to learn new things, cooked together, watched films, and discussed books. In the evenings, she took him for walks in the park, where he slowly but surely took steps towards a new life. It was a different world without pain, without betrayal, without regrets. One evening, sitting on the balcony of her apartment, David caught himself thinking that he felt good with her. So good that it was starting to scare me. He looked at her, her hair was flying in the wind, the joy of life sparkled in her eyes. Her smile was warm, sincere, without a shadow of doubt. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing his gaze. He exhaled slowly, looking away. "I'm just thinking how things have changed. How I have changed. How you changed me." She smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she took his hand and squeezed it lightly. The gesture was simple, but it felt like something more. There was no pity, no regret, no fear in her touch, only warm, sincere support. The next few weeks were a real turning point for him. He increasingly noticed that he was waiting for her to return from work, that he enjoyed every day spent with her. They began to travel out of town, spend evenings in cafes, discussing everything that could come to mind. She taught him to enjoy life again, and he began to believe that there really could be something good ahead. And at some point he realized. Feelings. They came carefully, slowly, but every day they became stronger. 5 years later, David and Rihanna have become a real family, strong and inseparable, like the roots of an old oak tree that shelters their house from the winds of fate. Their life changed, but only for the better now. Every morning began with the warmth of their beloved hands, with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the ringing laughter of children, which became the most beautiful melody for them. They lived in a cozy house by the lake, where the water reflected the sun's rays like thousands of little stars, and a light breeze played with the curtains in their bedroom, filling it with freshness and peace. Rihanna gave David not only love, but also the most precious miracle, their little daughter, a bright creature with huge, curious eyes, the color of the morning sky, and a ringing voice like the ringing of bells. She was their universe, the center around which their lives revolved, lighting up every day with her carefree joy. David looked at Rihanna with tenderness, watching as she, smiling, rocked the baby, singing her a quiet, gentle lullaby. In the faint light of the night lamp, their daughter's face seemed almost angelic. Tiny hands clung to her mother's finger, her eyelids lazily closed, and her lips trembled from time to time. But as soon as David approached, the girl, as if sensing his presence, began to move. She opened her huge eyes and, seeing her father, reached out to him with trusting, pure love. Her fingers, so tiny and warm, curled around his thumb, as if not wanting to let go. Sometimes she suddenly began to babble something in her childish language, and it sounded to David like the most beautiful music. He carefully picked her up, pressing her to his chest, and the baby was immediately enveloped in calm. She yawned, settled comfortably on his shoulder, and, after playing a little with his button or zipper on his jacket, fell asleep, completely trusting him. At these moments, his heart sank with overwhelming love and gratitude. He recalled the day when Rihanna entered his life, like a fresh spring wind, how her warm gaze and sincere words pulled him out of the darkness and filled every new day with meaning. Now she gave him another treasure, their daughter. And looking at this tiny life, David understood. He did not just find happiness, he found a whole world. Every day was filled with care and happiness. Their morning began with gentle kisses and light whispers so as not to wake up their daughter. During the day, they went together to the lake, where they played with the baby, enjoying her boisterous laughter. In the evening, they sat on the veranda, admiring how the sun, sinking below the horizon, painted the sky in crimson shades, and then, under the arch of stars, they shared their thoughts, dreams, plans. The house was filled with children's babbling, quiet conversations, good jokes, warmth that warmed even the coldest days. Sometimes, in rare moments of silence, when the night covered the city with its velvet blanket, David remembered the past, something that he had long tried to leave behind the memory line. He remembered the moments when it seemed that the world had turned its back on him, when loneliness, like a thick fog, penetrated every cell of his soul, squeezing it with cold fingers. He remembered how his own family, the one that was supposed to be his support, had backed down, turned away when he was no longer convenient for them. Their words, once filled with care, turned into icy reproaches, and their glances into empty, indifferent reflections of strangers. He remembered how one day he was left alone in this darkness, without support, without hope, like a ship that had lost its bearings in an endless, stormy ocean. But now these memories seemed alien, distant, as if they were happening not to him, but to someone else, someone he once knew, but had long ago let go of. Everything that happened before Rihanna, before their daughter, lost its meaning like an old, forgotten book with worn pages that you no longer wanted to read. Now he had everything: love, family, home, warmth, which he had been deprived of for so long. Rachel has spent her last years alone. After breaking up with Daniel, she tried to put her life back together, but things turned out to be more difficult than she expected. After the divorce and division of property, she moved to a smaller apartment, where everything seemed alien and faceless. The first months were filled with endless thoughts about the past, attempts to understand where exactly she had gone wrong. It was hard to admit that she herself had destroyed her family for the sake of a man who was simply using her. She tried to improve her career and switch to work, but the inner devastation did not disappear. Colleagues perceived her as a competent but reserved person, and new acquaintances quickly faded away. Rachel couldn't allow herself to be distracted from thinking about what she had lost. She spent her evenings alone, replaying memories of the past in her head. The only thread connecting her with her former life was her children. Alex and Sophie grew up, they had their own worries, but their main question remained their father. They could understand why he stopped communicating with Rachel. Betrayal and betrayal could not pass without a trace. But what they couldn't accept was his complete absence from their lives. He didn't show up at family holidays, didn't call, didn't write. Alex still tried to find excuses, but Sophie did not hide her indignation. One day at a family dinner, when the conversation turned to this again, Alex shook his head thoughtfully. "I understand that he was angry with you, Mom. But why did he cut us off too? We are his children." Sophie nodded, putting her fork aside. "He doesn't even answer my messages. I tried several times, but nothing. Is it possible to just forget about us like that?" Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.